If you're a lawyer who's been using Claude Cowork, you probably know by now that it can read and write DOCX files. But it's surprisingly hard to get it to do so consistently, and especially if you're submitting documents to a court, it takes a lot of effort to get everything to look right. I'm going to go over a better way to do this using Claude Cowork. That's going to make it so that you get the right formatting every single time, and also save you a lot of tokens and make Claude work a lot faster on your behalf. If you take a look at my screen here, you'll see that I told Claude that I'm a fictional attorney named Ronald McDonald. And I wanted to have it write both an engagement letter and a complaint for a fictional contract dispute in New York. Obviously, all the facts here are completely made up. I just want to focus on the formatting and getting everything to look right. If you look at the right side of my screen, we'll actually see the full engagement letter that Claude drafted. And again, this is a docx file that Claude was able to create for us. I don't really give it any other detail other than what you see in the prompt. And overall, it's okay. I think the header is decent. The content and style seems okay to me, but the formatting just looks a little unprofessional. I mean, you've got weird spacing here, for instance. I feel like some kind of indenting would look a little better. And we've also got oddities here, like this heading is completely separated from the paragraph that follows. I also don't really love how the signature block looks, but at least it's a good start. And if we go over to my desktop, I also told Claude to create files and folders on my desktop. And again, I'm pretending that I'm an employee at McDonald's Law PLLC. And Claude did a good job of organizing the files based on matter. So this is the Wexler matter. Here's what the letter looks like in Word. Again, this is exactly what we saw over in the Claude window. If you were going to actually send this to a client, you'd probably want to manually clean it up and make sure it looks more professional. You could also go back and forth prompting with Claude, but that might even be longer, especially if there's only a few formatting things to fix. I also had to draft a complaint. We can go and click into that now, and you'll notice that Claude did something a little bit weird with the file, and Word has actually given me an error that it's slightly corrupted. Luckily, Word's able to let me open it anyway, so we'll take a look. But it kind of has a lot of the same problems that we saw in the engagement letter. That is, the caption looks really messed up. In New York, and honestly in most places, you'd probably have like the caption on the left and then the index number on the right, and this line here would probably be cut off about halfway through the document. And again, a lot of times you're going to do stuff like center these headings, maybe even underline them or add a different style. And there's no real indenting happening. And also, I don't really like the bold numbers here either. The signature block looks odd. And then, of course, the verification we want to have on its own page rather than just awkwardly shoved in here. Now, some of the stuff I'm talking about is just personal preference. I mean, that's stuff like font, maybe some of the line spacing. Some of it, though, is actually required by local court rules. Again, this is going to be dependent on where you're submitting your documents. But either way, we've got a long way to go to actually get this into a place where we could submit it to a court. I've said this in a previous video, if you get a Word template that looks decent, that's a good place to start because then you can tell Claude, instead of creating something from scratch, start from something that you knew worked. So in this case, I said, hey, let's create a new complaint for a fake case. And I told it to do just some kind of random tort here and told it to make up the facts. And the reason I wanted to do this is because since we already drafted the complaint for the first case, the complaint for the second case, while it's still going to look off and have all those issues the first case had, it should at the very least copy as much as possible what we saw in the first case. So that's this Delgado case. We'll go ahead and open it. And first, we're going to look at the verified complaint. And it does look pretty similar to the first complaint, but it's not exactly the same either. If we look here, the index number is now over on the left-hand side, whereas in the first complaint, it was on the right-hand side. So even if you give Claude an example Word doc, which is generally good practice, it's still hard for it to completely nail the styling and not mess anything up. If you're just getting started and doing something DIY, it's definitely worth giving it an example Word doc, but it's not really going to solve all your problems. The engagement letter does look a lot more similar to the first engagement letter than the complaint did to the first complaint, but still, we'd want to clean this up, and overall, it just doesn't look great. I've talked about this a bit in a previous video where I went into detail on how DocX files work under the hood, but the real issue here is not Claude per se, it's that the DocX file was not designed with Claude in mind. It was designed to be used within Microsoft Word, and Claude is not really able to use Microsoft Word in the way that you or I can. This makes it just overall difficult for Claude. It uses a lot of tokens, and it's very hard for it to nail all the styling for you. So what that means is if you really want to get consistency out of Claude when you're drafting court documents, you need to get out of Microsoft Word as the drafting surface. And what I mean by that is Word really contains multiple things. One is the content, so that's the actual text. What are the legal arguments you're making? What is actually going to be on the page? And then two is the formatting. So how does everything look? Where on the page is it going to be? And overall, what is the look and feel of the document? You need to set it up so that Claude can focus only on the first parts, and then only when you're ready to see the final product should it use Word to render the documents. And I'll show you a slightly different approach, and this is going to look relatively similar. It's in a different folder, this one called Ronald McDonald Demo, and we still got a cases folder, and this should look relatively familiar here. We've just got the names of the cases in these folders here. And if we look here, we actually don't have any DocX files. So again, in the naive version where we're just having Claude touch DocX directly, everything in the folder is itself a DocX file. If we go over here in this other approach, we've got HTML, which is a file format that's really good for Claude. It allows it to specify a little bit of formatting, but it's also much more optimized for just reading and writing. So Claude is going to have a much easier time modifying the text, and it's overall going to use fewer tokens and cost you less money. Here's what the complaint looks like in HTML, and don't worry if it's a little bit intimidating. This is a format that's a lot closer to code than it is to DocX, but as we can see here, a lot of the content should be visible. So we got the title here, we can see here the actual body content, and again, this is a completely made up case and just nonsense facts, but we see the actual content that's going to go into the complaint. The only difference is when I look at it in this file, it just doesn't look that pretty. If you've heard of HTML before, it's probably been in the context of a web browser. Google Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, all of those are very good at reading HTML files. So if we double click on this discovery demands, it's actually going to open up a tab in Google Chrome. We can see it here. And now it looks a lot better. We've got some semblance of styling. Obviously, this is not ready to go to court because it's not even on like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. It's just in the web browser. But this should make it a lot easier to see the content. And it's actually a good thing that it's bare bones because that means Claude only needs to worry about the text and the content, and the formatting isn't so much of a concern. And this is a chat where I was telling it to just create an engagement letter and complaint and some other documents for a particular client, making up all the facts. I am telling it to use DocketDrafter, but even if you weren't using a software like DocketDrafter, this is the kind of thing that you'd want to think about in order to get a really slick Claude brief drafting system. If we take a look at the engagement letter, we can see here that it's going to look a lot cleaner. So we've got an actual header here, got the date over here, the indenting and spacing, all of that is well thought out. And it's not that Claude got magically smarter. What's going on here is we've separated out the content, which Claude needs to do in HTML, from the formatting, which honestly is pretty static. And once you set it up once, and once you have a deterministic way to go from HTML to Word, it becomes very, very easy to do. And here's what the complaint looks like. And as I was mentioning with the complaint that Claude drafted originally, this is kind of what a caption should actually look like. And this is what I was talking about, the index number on the right. The headings look a lot more thought out. We've got actual indents. The numbering looks good. It's not bolded on the numbering or anything like that. I also had to draft an answer. And again, because we set up this formatting ahead of time and because Claude just has to write HTML, all this becomes very, very easy. I just told Claude to draft another complaint, this time with a completely new case, and we're going to call it a tort. And again, I'm connected directly to DocketDrafter. In DocketDrafter, all this is kind of set up for you. So all you got to do is connect Claude to your DocketDrafter workspace, and it's going to be able to know what your templates look like and how to take the files from HTML and turn them into DocX. In a second, we should see the brand new case folder get created, and we should be able to view the HTML ourselves. And now we can see the Reyes case. If we click on it here, we're going to see the complaint HTML. We're going to be able to click on it, read it, and of course, inspect it and tell Claude if we have any things we want it to add. And then Claude is going to render it to DocX for us so we can see exactly what it's going to look like. And maybe we want to add another cause of action. We'll have Claude go ahead and do that. And I'll just keep this running because I think it's not going to take it very long to go and add this and render it for us. And again, it should overall look pretty good. We're going to keep it open on the right here. And I'll also point out, again, because all this is firm specific, whatever you want in your firm's templates, that just has to be set up once. So if, for instance, you have a different font you like maybe Century Schoolbook versus Times New Roman, that's totally fine. And it's still running. Hopefully it'll be done soon. And just like that, we've got a second cause of action, which you can see here is negligent hiring, training, supervision. Again, this is not really a real case, but that's just to show you how easy it is to actually modify the documents. And again, Claude is already smart enough to handle all this stuff for you. It's not like we need a new leap in model capability. What's really missing for Claude is not intelligence. It's a workspace that makes all of this stuff very, very easy. One of the other benefits of using HTML versus DocX is actually with version control. If you ever worked with complicated DocX files, you probably struggled to deal with track changes, and you probably had a lot of files like _v4_final.docx. Well, if you use HTML, a lot of that becomes simpler because Claude can use powerful version control tools that are used by software developers. And I'll show you what I mean. You can just ask Claude, what were the last 5 changes in this folder? So I'm just going to ask Claude to give me an overview, and I want to know when these changes happened and also who made them. So we can see here, the workspace actually allows Claude to track every single change that was made. And not only every single change, but it writes down why it made a particular change. So we can see here that over the course of about an hour or so, I've made all these 5 changes, including opening a few different cases. And then here at 2:05, we actually added the exact second cause of action. Now, Regardless if you were to use a software tool like DocketDrafter or not, I'd encourage you to think about getting Claude out of DocX and really treating DocX like a formatting and rendering layer rather than the source of truth. If you let Claude draft in HTML and Markdown, it's going to be a lot faster. Claude is going to have a much easier time at making edits to files. And you should just have overall much better results. I think it's a little bit confusing about Claude for legal work and Claude for a lot of professional work is that, while it's true Claude is powerful, it can use your computer, and it can overall make your life a lot easier. If you want to give Claude the maximum leverage, you have to start thinking about not just what can Claude do for you, but what can you do for Claude to make its work a lot easier. If you make something 10 or 100 times more efficient for Claude, you're going to see that very, very quickly. Now, if you're interested in building something like this for your own firm, and especially if you're doing a lot of litigation, send me an email, which I'll link in the description. I'd be happy to walk through what this looks like in practice, and I'd be happy to show you what it would look like for your firm's documents. Super easy to set up, and all you need is a Claude account.